Good afternoon. I realize this is the last presentation of the day, so I think I'll give you a break on the slides and just talk. And we'll kind of go over a few stories and hopefully kind of set a frame for thinking about the geopolitics of icebreakers. I'm Michael Peck. I'm counsel to Hoppe Marine, a 75-year-old German company that is in marine technologies. Um, it's, uh, it's very active in icebreakers technologies, and it collaborates closely with companies such as Akka Solutions. Um, I think my colleagues will be here at the end, and you can take handouts regarding Hoppe's technologies and also check out the booth, which has actually a bonus for you. We have a schnapps available called Icebreaker. So pick up a bottle, maybe two, to jumpstart your weekend. Hoppe has a long history with icebreakers, and I think it's interesting to note that they founded a museum with a ship, a coal-fueled icebreaker called the Stettin that's docked in Hamburg, and they founded a museum around it. They've had 3 generations of their family, the owning family, that have worked on that ship. And so there's quite a history with icebreakers, and that's part of their interest in this field. Their booth is in the German pavilion in Building 1. So the presentation is called Competitive Landscape for Icebreakers, and I can just do this in a word, right? It's geopolitics. Geopolitics is driving this particular segment, and what does this mean? We grew up with the great game with many players, and it's really come down to 2 players in today's geopolitics. One of which is playing Monopoly, and the other one is playing Go, right? So we need to navigate our way through this kind of context. And for icebreakers, by definition, it's dual use with regard to military as well as commercial use. So it's very much intertwined with the export controls, sanctions, and other direct participations by various states. And you will see that, for example, the one revision I have to the slides, which you can download from the program, is that very recently, a couple of weeks ago, the US and Finland agreed to up the order to 11 icebreakers from a lower amount. And it's very much driven by state participation. So what does that mean? For a lot of companies, whether you're big or small, whether you're Hanwha or you're a supplier in their chain, we throw up our hands, well, it's geopolitics. What can we do, right? It's beyond our control. It's exogenous. And it actually isn't. And I'd like to kind of break down some of that and talk about what companies can do to manage their way through this ecosystem that is complex, but yet there are steps we can take. So I will focus on the soft bits, the wet parts, the difficulties of navigating constraints that aren't visible, they're opaque. Sometimes there's corruption. Sometimes these things turn on a dime, particularly with the US. And I'll try to tie it to my experience, because I've been working for a while. I've been practicing as a lawyer for 25 years, and much of that was in-house, managing risk for companies operating globally, including in maritime. I would like to suggest a couple of presentations that occurred previously in the program that you can also download, particularly Lee-eun Chol's U.S. shipbuilding industry trends and market entry strategies. Very, very well done, setting the context not only for Korean companies, but explaining the difficulties and challenges of selling into the U.S. market. And then Lee Ho-jun's U.S. new maritime security strategy and its implications. You can also download that as well. I think it'll be helpful for the non-Korean participants as well as especially the Korean participants. And then especially for the Korean participants, I'd like to recommend actually a set of YouTubes by a professor at Seoul National that I've worked with for many years, Kim Tae-yu. And he has been highlighting for many years now the importance of the polar route for Korea and its strategic significance. The materials are available on YouTube. If you're in the maritime industry and you're based in Korea or Japan, I think it's very good viewing. And finally, this is material that is generally not viewed by non-lawyers. I don't know why. It's about €1 million worth of education in 3 days. Baker and McKenzie's export controls and customs duties. They do an annual seminar online. It's very dry, but as you probably know, we have now all become tariff, export control, and sanctions experts over the past few years. This is stuff that nobody studies in law school, but now it's kind of become mainstream for all of us. And that's how I keep up. I'd like to recommend that you use those materials as well. So briefly, I'll go over some examples and experiences of the soft bits, focusing on what we can do, what's of concern, so what, and now what. And what I'm trying to do is help particularly Korean companies, but others, avoid the disasters that we have faced, for example, in offshore. We've had construction companies and Korean shipbuilders lose decades of profits in mismanaged offshore projects by going in as, into lump sum fixed EPC contracts. And, we know this. Basically, I think the legal teams dropped the ball, and senior management didn't integrate risk management properly into this work. We don't have that luxury here with icebreakers. This is very much a national priority. This is very much driven by the great game, great powers. And unlike offshore, so all of these projects in this building, offshore wind and other projects, the government actually cannot help you very much, right? The government is not in the lead on these matters. For offshore, yes, it can backstop the financing agreements so you can get bankable projects and move forward, and everybody's standing by for that backstop. But for icebreakers in particular, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. It's up to industry, and it's up to industry to do it smart, not like we did with EPC on offshoring. So let me give you a few examples, and I'll explain my background and why I have these views. I grew up, reading about Shackleton, Amundsen, Nansen, the Fromm, all of these kind of explorers in the Antarctic, the Arctic. This was, I grew up in Korea, so this is a world that was way just in my imagination, and I never thought that I would have the opportunity to work in these fields. But about, I guess, 10, 12, 13 years ago, STX Group ran into trouble in Europe. Basically, and this is where the geopolitics starts, Sarkozy, who just is now doing the perp walk to jail, actually convinced the people in Brussels to initiate phase 2 anti-competitive review of STX's acquisition of Aka Yards. And that is how I joined the company. They got stuck. And so I joined STX to run legal and then eventually risk management and then the integration of Aka Yards into the STX group, which was doing very well during my tenure there, but it kind of fell apart thereafter. And it started with Sarkozy triggering phase 2 review in Brussels, very much a political maneuver, things that as a corporate lawyer, as a securities lawyer, I'd worked on Wall Street and Palo Alto in California, like Silicon Valley. This was new to me, right? That the state would be so involved in these deals. And in shipbuilding, it's very much a player, not only in Korea, but elsewhere. And so this anti-competition review ended up resulting in STX having to bid for all of the shares on the Oslo Exchange. It was much more expensive than it should have been. But as part of that transaction, we bought the company. We're looking through the inventory. We had things like a plane that we didn't know about, and sold that shortly. And then this company called Aka Arctic, which was not a priority. So Aka Arctic was part of the Aka Group. STX bought the Aka Group basically for the cruise, military, and then the offshore supply vessels that were based out of the west coast of Norway. That kind of technology wasn't really available in Korea at that time, and they wanted to take leadership in those ecosystems. But then there was this thing, Aka Arctic. And so this was way down the priority list at that time. And we had, I don't know, about a month into the integration, we're like, we should finally visit these guys. So we showed up at Aker Arctic at 9:30 in the evening. The whole company was waiting for us, and I brought the chairman. It's like a two-story facility in the middle of nowhere in Finland. It's an industrial park, cold, but it's 9:30. And so we go up, we thought, okay, we'll at least have coffee and kind of meet and greet and leave. But then, the head of the unit started his presentation, had like 230 slides. But, the whole staff was waiting for us. So we had to grin and bear it and stick through the 2 hours of presentation. At one point, I left the building, tried to get a cigarette outside. I got locked out, and I nearly died because it's at negative 40 degrees there in Finland. So that was my experience with Aker Arctic. But for those of you who have not visited that facility, it's kind of legendary in the icebreaker space, but it's not a major, huge CapEx facility, right? It's basically an ice skating rink with monitors. This is stuff that we can do here in Korea. This is stuff that can be done in other parts of the world. So the competitive landscape of icebreakers, we tend to think that this is technology that needs to be either brought in or otherwise collaborated with. And it's important, right? We have a lot of Korean companies in Oslo and elsewhere trying to bring in a lot of technology related to defense and so forth. But icebreakers, yeah, I think the collaborations are very important, and I'll get to that as well. But this is something that the Korean government, the city of Busan, announced last week. The port of Busan announced last week that this is a priority. These are things that are important and should be also homegrown. But for carrying on with these integration and the politics, the second kind of geopolitical headache with STX was as we had purchased the company, they had sold part of the yards in Germany to Russian investors, represented by an oligarch, who was probably representing, the usual suspects as real beneficial owners. And for many reasons, we basically needed to shut down those yards in Germany. And it was very difficult to do so because, the Russians were sending Medvedev, people from Gazprom. The oligarchs were promising lots of icebreaker deals to keep the yards in Warnemünde and Wismar up and viable. All geopolitics. This is stuff that is not a normal course of business for most of us. And it keeps coming, right? The yards in Saint-Nazaire in France, they also do the helicopter kind of carriers for the French Navy. The French were not happy with having Korean owners. And so they started putting pressure on us to, sell back to the state. And they're funny stories, right? So we have Korean executives that are treated as in manners that they are not used to, right? So they arrive at Charles de Gaulle, and then you get the police escort to the Elysee for a signing ceremony, and everybody gets excited, and expectations are, this is going to be great, but the risk management isn't there. And so, you have, anytime you have a state participating, it gets very, very difficult for private industry to manage those risks. And these are the types of soft bits, wet parts that we need to be cognizant of. I pointed out the two Korean presentations from yesterday, rightfully prideful of K shipbuilding, right? This is probably the most efficient group of shipyards in the world. It's not the efficiency that's going to get us a success in either MRO or icebreakers, because our system, our ecosystem of kind of kapul, or customer yard-driven efficiencies, where the ecosystem of suppliers is organized by a very solid supplier management system, managing man hours and so on. That's not the game here. So, the Philly shipyard, it's going to be painful, right? The Philly shipyard used to be also part of the Aker group. And the former CEO was explaining to me that, when the Norwegians were running it, they had trouble with, U.S. labor. Do you think the Hanwha group, INSA team, the HR team, is used to testing urine for drugs? No. We have no way of managing that type of personnel. And and our understanding of those issues it's very different from the supplier-driven Kap-ul ecosystem that we're used to here in Korea, where you can basically use the suppliers as a compliance buffer as well as squeeze them on costs and financing. So these types of difficulties will be very evident in icebreakers because they're dual use, because it's military players, because it's great game, and we need to be very aware of those risks. Another example, Helsinki Yards also was part of ACA. It had, this story has everything, right? We have ESG, we have AI coming, we have the great game, trade restrictions, and geopolitics. The Helsinki Yard, I think, had a large environmental cleanup cost. There was no work for it. So the shutdown was very, very expensive. In fact, I wanted to convert it into a nightclub. Because it had a good location for Helsinki nightlife, which was, direly, and I think still direly lacking. But these yards and the fact that you need to manage them and they need to have flow, and you have labor unions who are sitting on your boards in Europe. In the U.S., you have very, very different problems. Starting with the drug testing. These are not easy things to do. And our organizations are not primed to deal with geopolitical risks. I'll give you a couple of other examples from different industries. I used to be general counsel for a tire company, setting up a tire plant in Europe. And you go around and you try to bargain for state aid from Poland, from Slovakia, from Hungary, where we ended up going. And the state aid bargaining is part of it. But there's also corruption. It tends to be the case that once you start getting serious about a particular location, somehow all the land around that particular plant location is bought up by bureaucrats and their families. So it's managing how to proceed with these deals. That we have some naivete here, and the reason we have naivete in Asia is that we're used to a parental government, right? The government will take the lead. Kotra will not do this for you, right? Alternatively, if you go to AmCham, for example, looking for state aid in Georgia, Nebraska, or whatever, they will quickly put you in touch with Kim In-chang, which they have a very hand-in-glove relationship, and then you'll get charged through the nose for this because you don't have in-house capacities. So this type of work that involves governments, cross-border, unfamiliar environments, we need to look deeper beyond K shipbuilding, beyond efficiencies, beyond the Kap-ul ecosystem where you're squeezing your suppliers. So this is, I didn't realize this, till 20 years ago. I started working with these companies, and these are not usual considerations in normal course of business for most companies, but now in shipbuilding, in icebreakers in particular, it's very much part and parcel of business. Similarly with trade restrictions, right? So whether it's the rare earth restrictions out of China or export controls out of the US, sanctions, the new port fees, all of this is great game. And it's not exogenous. You need to manage it, right? There's flagging of the ships, there's supply relationships, there's long lead times, 2 years to set up in the US as a supplier and qualifying for Coast Guard or naval business. These things need to be planned. And now you need a $100,000 H-1, whatever the B visa for each employee. So, it takes a long lead time. And I think that if I would just, wanted to take this opportunity to give you a heads up, particularly for icebreakers. At the end of the day, shipyards tend to be marketplaces of technologies. And we've been very, very good at the efficiency end here in Asia. But now for this type of work and MRO and naval, what it's coming down to is aspects of transactions that require a little bit deeper thinking and consideration of these larger, bigger picture geopolitical concerns and what we can do about them. We can't leave it up to the government because their hands are tied, right? At the end of the day, there's a limit to what smaller countries can do in this game that's become a bipolar game. At the same time, there are things that we can do to get kind of chips that we can trade and bargain with in this world. So I mentioned Aqua Arctic. Maybe in Korea we can set up an ice rink to be an icebreaker tester as well. But don't just go through the motions. Another experience I had, I spent 19 years teaching at Seoul National in the College of Engineering with Kim Tae-yu. And I was briefly their CTO for our nation's premier university. Our approach has been to pump out patent applications and basically paper innovation. And the result of that is a lot of patents that are useless, right? So unless there's transactions around that IP, whether it's know-how that's patented or otherwise, unless you're transacting around that intellectual property, it's got a zero valuation at best, right? You're also sinking in all your R&D and other expenses related to it. It's signaling behavior rather than valuable intellectual property. So my hope is that for this space, we will look at this a little bit more deeply than the local politicians, a little bit more deeply than the short-term vision of this administration as industry that is looking towards 20 years. Thanks to global warming, we will have opportunities with the Northern Route that are very important strategically, but also just simply as a matter of business. And then the HR aspects. So, I look around, I walked around this conference, I've been to these a couple of times. The composition is interesting to me. I would have thought by this time we would have a younger group in the conference. It's still a lot of the older, male engineer cohort that was working in shipbuilding 10 years ago. We have an issue with recruiting young people into this. Last fall, I spoke at Seoul National at the Joseonhaeangwa, at the Naval Maritime Engineering Department about these issues. None of those PhD students want to go here into shipbuilding. They all want to end up as professors or K-pop stars, right? We have a dearth of talent that we need to think, clearly and deeply about. We need to start rewarding our people and encouraging them to innovate in this space. It's similar in semiconductors and other industries where we're going to have to start importing a lot of talent and integrating them into a workforce. Finally, on a more kind of block transaction integration of innovation, M&A, a lot of the bigger players and the smaller are thinking of M&A as a way to quickly bring in talent. What happens, though, generally is that through a combination of the advisors trying to pump up their fees and the bankers and others and kind of egos at the larger shipyards and the major players, you want to buy big. You want to buy big organizations. Buy a shipyard in Philly. Buy something. That's not the way to go. What you need to do is start very small. Buy a naval architect shop, a design shop, even a market intelligence shop. Get a clearer understanding of the state of play in these other countries so that you can spend your money wisely, so that you can partner wisely. And finally, as part of this, we need to get out of our parochial mindset of, we need to do this all in Korea. It's Korea versus China versus Japan. No. We need to start networking, partnering, bringing in Europeans, Americans, South Americans, and having them work with us within our companies and then also via partnerships, which is why I'm here speaking on behalf of Hope Korea and Hope Marine to reach out, hopefully to start discussions with Korean companies that have a longer term view and a greater understanding of the complexities of the state of play in this space. So I tried to keep it on time. I think I did. And I really don't want it, we're the last people, so I don't want to delay the panel, and I'll wrap it up here. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.